the wealth of opportunity from an investment perspective in the private markets is far greater than the public markets.
Yep.
So take equity, just over 10% of the companies in the US are public.
Yep.
The rest are private. The relationships are so critical,
Yeah.
but it's so easy in our industry to focus just on the investment piece and forget that the other side is important. In our industry, we tend to think, we can do everything, it's investment. You have to be a bit pragmatic about what you can feasibly do competently.
If you're speaking to someone younger, what a couple of tips you'd give them to sort of be successful at LGT Crestone or in their career in general? Private markets investments are investors can find some real value. I find the best way to learn is learn from someone who's done it before and given it a go. Hi, I'm Travis Miller, host of Grow Your Wealth podcast. Thanks for joining me here today. On these podcast sessions, we're going to talk through how certain investors have navigated the bumpy road of investing, whether it be through business or investments in general. Thanks for listening today. Welcome back to the Grow Your Wealth podcast, where we bring you insightful conversations with industry leaders to help you navigate the world of finance and investments. I'm your host, Travis Miller, and today we have a very special guest, Martin Randall, joining us. Martin is head of private markets at LGT Crestone. His overarching investment belief is that alternatives have an important portfolio role to play, and he has a wealth of experience in developing and delivering innovative investment solutions. Martin's journey in the financial industry began in the UK before he moved to Australia and joined UBS Wealth Management in 2014. Then he transitions to Crestone when it launched in 2016. Today we'll delve into Martin's fascinating career from his early days in structured products to his pivotal role in transitioning alternative assets from institutional only to wealth management. We'll also explore some of the key lessons he learned along the way and discuss the current challenges and opportunities in the private market space. So without further ado, let's dive into our conversation with Martin Randall from LGT Crestone. Welcome, Martin.
Thanks, Travis.
How about we start at the beginning? A bit of a potted summary of who you are and what you're currently focused on from a business perspective.
Well, I'm a born and bred Essex boy from TV show Infamy.
Yeah, gotcha.
For those that have watched that, yes, I grew up just east of London. Small family, one older brother. Not much sort of extended family there. Married to a British girl I met over here.
Gotcha.
I have a 15-year-old stepson, teenager, and a 21-month-old. So taking a bit of a barbell approach there to my personal life. 2 Cocker Spaniels, live up in the Northern Beaches. Started back in finance pretty much 20 years ago to the day, coming into structured products, which was an interesting place to start. Obviously was there for until about 2012, then took a bit of a career break and landed in Australia at UBS and now LGT Crestone. And as you noted, I've been heavily involved in sort of developing alternatives for private wealth investors.
Yeah, I mean, look at LGT Crestone in Australia, clearly leading in the private wealth space, right? When I look at sort of the different exposures you give investors and just the breadth of the choices that are available to your investor base. So I can see you're probably a busy man.
Always.
Yeah. So how'd you end up in Australia?
It's an interesting one. I took a career break really. So we went through the GFC, fascinating experience, and structured products, as you know from your background, Trav, you need typically one of two things: higher interest rates and volatility.
For sure.
We got to sort of the end of 2012 and we didn't really have, interest rates were on the way down, volatility was pretty muted. And so we were putting things together and I struggled to sell things and position things that I wouldn't buy myself. And it didn't feel comfortable. And I effectively resigned at that point and decided, let's travel, see what I wanted to do. I actually had no interest in or no intention to go back into finance at the time.
Gotcha.
And so, traveled the world for a little bit, the US and South America, landed on these shores. And as most Brits end up doing, they do a bit of a bit of working in the eastern suburbs, and then I met my now wife, who was British, and that sort of led to me moving back into the world of finance.
Gotcha. You turned up, it was warmer than England, and you said, I'm staying.
Just a touch, yeah. The Brits never go home. The Aussies always come back.
It's true. Right, and so something our listeners like to hear about is just the backstory of sort of where you get to where you are today, right? So we talk about Essex. Let's go through your education. Where'd you start?
Yeah, so I was at a comprehensive school, just a run-of-the-mill comprehensive school in Barking. Yep. I was pretty studious. I was pretty quiet back then, but I was always good on the sort of the maths and the science side. That was always my sort of core interest. So did A levels. I don't know what the comparable is here, and then went to university. And at that point, I never really had a view of what I wanted to do. I thought I might go into sort of medical profession, but then I leaned into computer science at the time. Obviously, technology was
ahead of your time.
Yeah, maybe. And so I did a computer science degree at Queen Mary, so one of the University of London, which was very sort of coding orientated, which sort of suited my need. I was a bit of a problem solver. I loved doing that. So algebra, I enjoyed. Guilty as charged on that front. And so coding was very much about solving problems, figuring out ways to do it. But I got to the end of that degree and didn't really want to sort of go into that. I didn't feel that was my calling. And so having not really done anything in the financial, I'd never studied business or economics or what have you. I wanted something numerical and ended up, and we can touch on it as needed, but falling into finance, within wealth management specifically.
Hey, if you're enjoying this, please subscribe on whatever platform you're using. It helps us build a community. We want to educate investors, and this is what it's all about. It's interesting. I look at structured product, and it often is problem solving, right? Someone will come to you and go, I want a payoff that looks a bit like this. You go, well, that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
But if you combine a number of financial instruments, whether it's a deposit plus a derivative, you end up with a payoff profile that might suit what an investor wants. So it's not illogical. You go from enjoying problem solving to structured products. And I know pre-GFC was probably the boom time for structured products.
Yeah, I got 4 years, Travis.
What's
I got
that?
4 years before everything blew up.
Yeah.
But
Gotcha.
I mean, it made sense.
It's still a genuine investment asset class, right? If you look across the different buckets of alternatives, everyone will put the structured product asset class there. But it's a little bit more cyclical. Like you mentioned before, it's pretty cool when vol's high. When you got a little bit interest rates a bit higher, it's just all about timing.
Absolutely.
Timing your run to allocate. Now, going on sort of people who've influenced you through your career and your personal life, if you were to pick 3 people that have made a difference for you, who would you throw out there?
The obvious, in terms of the way that if let's say if I have been successful, a lot of it has come back to relationships, and that ultimately comes from my parents. Yep. So yes, boring, obvious, of course, but they've absolutely shaped me. But with regards to those two, I worked with my dad in my first job.
Gotcha, right? That's good.
And so,
was he a good boss?
I didn't work for him,
gotcha.
But he kind of got me my first, let's say, break, if you like. So, I got out of uni, had a couple of interviews. He got me a job interview at Clumwell Benson. It's now part of SocGen or Clumwell Hambro, it's called now. So one of the big private banks, merchant banks of the time. It was like a junior portfolio manager role. I was grossly underqualified, so I didn't get the job.
Gotcha.
Fast forward a month or two, role come up in the structured products team. Very niche place to start, but they called me back in independently and said, oh, look, we need someone to fill a gap. And I come in, and again, because I think of the problem-solving background, I've managed to do that. But the reason I say this is to have, you hope that every son or daughter idolizes their father in some capacity. Yep. To come into a working environment and see him in a working environment and how people viewed him.
Gotcha.
Was incredibly insightful for me, because he was exactly who he was with me at home in the work environment. And so, that really sort of highlighted the whole kind of the relationship concept. Be who you are. Don't try to be someone else And so I basically learned everything in terms of the way I hope I act and am seen in the business arena is from him. And so, he was the fundamental kind of shaper, if you like. following on from that, my first boss, a guy called Andy Halford, again, another structured products derivatives guy, used to run Scandinavian sales at Dresdner at the time, become Commerzbank. Moved down to the private bank, and he really gave me my first shot, and kind of made me, if you like, in terms of the whole structured products piece. Worked with him for 6.5 years. We still talk. He came to my wedding 5 years ago. So he's probably, other than my dad, the most influential person in certainly my earlier career. And then the other one I have to call out, who you'll probably know, is Scott Kelly.
Yeah, of course. Yep.
And so Scott, I worked with at Kleinworts. So back in 2004, I still remember to this day, I built a structured products portfolio for Scott when he used to work in the Channel Islands. So we had a link there.
Wow.
And then when I got to Australia, met my now wife, I wasn't a hairdresser or something that fit the visa list. So I was like, I'm going to have to go back into finance. And so I was like, who do I know? And Scott was head of the investment team at UBS Wealth.
UBS, yeah.
And I remember sitting down at Avenue outside Chifley, and I was like, do you do structured products here? And he's like, not really. It didn't go so well in GFC, but I've got a maternity cover role down in Melbourne. Yeah. And within a couple of months, I'd taken that role at a firm in an industry that I'd not really worked with before, and he gave me my shot. He backed me as a person. With, as he put it, sort of street smarts rather than specific focus on funds. It was a fund diligence role. Yep. And so again, without Scott making that call, I would not be here. So, my father, Andy, and Scott are sort of the three I'd probably highlight.
Yeah, no, that's good. Very good. And then the next piece sort of links together, like 2 to 3 pivotal moments. Sounds like Scott helping you get a visa is pretty handy. Anything else? Anything any bumps that were interesting?
Yeah, look, I mean, Lehman's was fascinating, right? Was it a pivotal moment? It was a learning moment in terms of what can go wrong, because it'd been pretty smooth sailing from 2004 to 2008. Yep. To this day, we didn't have a huge amount of exposure to Lehman structured products, but I still remember I sent an email out on Friday just saying that we, don't think, there's work going on with the Mura and Barclays. We think will all be resolved over the weekend. Like it was like a golden email that I got completely wrong, and then obviously come in on Monday and the world had fallen apart.
I think that era, a lot of people that you would have thought knew a lot of information, very well informed, should have known what was going on. It's one of those moments you look back and go, I don't reckon they had a clue. No. I know there's a lot of people that I don't think they really knew what was going on coming into the GFC. No. Coming out the other side, I think everyone was an expert, but in hindsight, everyone's an expert, right?
Yeah, but I mean, it was a fascinating learning experience, just in terms of the way things work. But yeah, look, beyond that, there's an interesting sequence of events and things that sort of happen both personally and from a work perspective. Like, if I think about, why I'm still here, like Scott obviously played a key role there, but, I met a guy at Kleinworts who worked in the finance team, so a guy called Mark Gentry, who, through his girlfriend at the time, I met Christy's group of friends, my wife. Yep. I didn't know Christy that well. I'd met her 3 times. I was probably quite inebriated on every occasion.
Using your best lines.
But it was, it was a work connection, a friend connection that ended up translating when I got here. Christy reached out and obviously led to me looking for a job. And if it hadn't been through that connection at work and a relationship I formed at work, to coming here, meeting Christy, having the connection with Scott, like none of this would have happened. And so, that connection, just following it through is interesting when I look back. And then you combine that with, the Australian wealth management industry and what happened with UBS seeking to exit, the evolution of Crestone, to then be able for LGT Crestone to take what we felt was the best of what UBS had to offer and then translate to the local market. Yeah. That's really then started off the move into alternatives. And so, personal, professional circumstance has led to this, and none of it's really been intentional. And so it's just, I found it, when I think back, it's quite interesting.
I mean, what's interesting is the wealth management industry, and particularly finance industry, Australia, is very networked, right? And so your skill to hold on to some contacts and networks you previously had And then ultimately it pops up. Those networks are kind of handy personally and professionally. I think that's critical though, right, to success in Australia. You keep your relationships sort of close, get to know lots of different people.
It's fascinating.
It's an interesting market.
And you have to focus. I mean, Andy, my first boss, said, and it wasn't his quote, but one of the guys he used to work with at Dresdner said, we spend all our time focusing on the investments and the intellectual thing, markets. Yep. But the reality is it's about people moving people.
Yeah, for sure.
It's a relationship game, first and foremost. Of course, you need the credibility. And you just see it pick up. You know, from the first days I spent a year in Melbourne, everyone knew each other. And then when I got to UBS, you probably remember Joey Maracadé as well, right?
Sure.
I was his client in the UK when he used to work at RBS. Then he moved out here, and then I got there and I was like, that's a distinct name. And he was like head of advisory within UBS and the structured products guy. And we're great friends. And it was just like the connections and the relationships are so critical. But it's so easy in our industry to focus just on the investment piece and forget that the other side is important as well.
Hey guys, I hope you're enjoying this episode. If you want to learn more about alternative assets, there's a book here you can read, How You Grow Your Wealth with Alternative Assets. Now back to the episode. Now jumping to, so I remember the times when sort of Crestone came out of UBS. And when you think about that, what advice would you give to someone thinking about sort of moving from a large organisation to a smaller organisation? I know when Crestone came out, it wasn't a small organisation, but at the end of the day, it's kind of a startup, right? And it's tough to make those decisions and tough to make the move. So I think it took some courage from relevant people and they had to take a risk. But like, what's your thoughts on how that process went? And if someone else was looking to make that move, any advice you might have for them?
Yeah, look, it was a fascinating time, and you should sit down and talk to Mike Chisholm about that. He's got some cracking stories. And it was an amazing journey. Like, I think there's a couple of things I would probably highlight. One, when you're working for a big organisation that has a lot more resource, and then you come into a smaller organisation that's very competent, you do have to acknowledge what you can and can't do and the breadth of what you can do. Because again, in our industry, we tend to think, we can do everything. It's investment. You have to be a bit pragmatic about what you can feasibly do competently. And so you have to be more practical with the resource allocation that you have and make the most of broader relationships as you build the team, because you can't just rely on this 50-strong team over here or this stream. So relying on your partners, when we launched the business, we had our strategic partners. So, CBA, Northern for cash and banking, Northern Trust for custody, obviously UBS for the research rate. And so we leveraged off of those, and we also leveraged off of our manager relationships to support our investment views, rather than just saying, no, my view is sacred and that's all. So you have to be a bit more pragmatic on that front. On the personal side, when you move from like a 10,000 strong organization or however many to one that's like less than 200, if you're incredibly passionate about the business, and I certainly am, Mike certainly am, he's still in the weeds sometimes, it's very easy to break out all of the barriers and just do all things for all people. And it become quickly apparent to me that you have to put some barriers up and say, here's my area, because before you know it, you can get overloaded. So in a more boutique or a small organization, you can do so much stuff and it's exciting because you have more flexibility, but it's very easy to overload because you have that flexibility. So, from a personal perspective, particularly if you're someone that's uber passionate about the project or what have you you're focused on, just make sure you put some boundaries up.
I agree.
Because it can quickly overwhelm you.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think sort of running my own business, you see the opportunities, right? You see that could work or that could work, but then you've kind of got to keep your eye on the current target and still note it down, because sort of growth can be building blocks and you bolt things on progressively. If you try and do it all at once, it's just either it's very tough or it just won't work. So it does tend to be progressive because you don't have unlimited resourcing like some of the large organisations.
If only.
How about a couple of bumps in the road?
Oh, look, Lehman's was a bump for sure. That was a learning curve. The importance of of understanding, what can happen in a negative scenario, the importance of catering for the lowest common denominator.
Yep.
So you can have a great set of advisors, clients, or what have you, and it only takes one to have an issue. So make sure that you cater for the lowest common denominator in those scenarios.
Yep.
Again, it's indicative of the industry, and I've been guilty of this in the past. Sometimes you kind of get focused too much on something that is intellectually stimulating.
Yeah, for sure.
Right? And you get an idea and you're like, this is great. It's the best thing since sliced bread. And you kind of go in the tunnel.
Yeah.
And you don't kind of consider the bigger picture. Is this really going to move the dial? Is it a priority in the suite of things?
Yeah.
And so many times in certainly in my past, I've just gone in a rabbit hole and like, this is amazing. But then the second you step out, you're like, that really was a waste of time.
Yeah.
But because it's exciting and new, or you think it's a good idea, it's
a little bit of your structured product background, because you kind of can be, because there's so many tools available to a structured product person, and you can solve a problem that didn't exist. And you can come up with a product that no one actually wants. But it was pretty cool for you to put it together and go, do you know, it can do somersaults. But if an investor doesn't want to buy it and it doesn't solve a problem for an investor, intellectually doing something interesting for yourself doesn't generate revenue and
keep it simple.
Build a business.
Like there's so many times you overcomplicate, and so often the best solution's the simplest solution. So that's taken a long time for me to learn.
Yeah, I totally get it. So what does a normal day look like for you in the office? So you sort of come in and so you're obviously looking across various alternative assets. That's your, that's your thing.
Yeah, look, it's probably the most multifaceted role I've ever had. So structured products was broad because you've obviously got the sourcing, the pricing, the structuring, the settlements and all that sort of stuff, and the sales. And it's a little bit similar with alternatives. So my team sort of covers private markets, so equity, debt, venture, unlisted real assets, property, infrastructure, and then hedge funds and all of the weird and wacky stuff, some of the stuff we've been doing more recently. So you've got a broad array of asset classes to sort of diligence, just from a top-down perspective. But there's a big sourcing piece with regards to alternatives. If you want to go find a global equity manager, it's relatively straightforward. You can find lists. Alts is a lot more relationship-based, so there's a harder component there. So building the network is important. Obviously, the diligence on the investment capabilities is crystal clear. But within alternatives, you've also got this structuring component. Because not only have you got to understand if the investment capability is what needs to be, but how is it delivered? Because we're dealing with private clients here relative to institutions, and the delivery mechanism or the product solution that makes sense for wealth is different to what makes sense for Future Fund or Aussie Super or what have you. So there's sort of this consultative role before you even get to the diligence and the deal, so to speak. You then add to that, obviously, you need to work with the advisors, so they're like internal stakeholders. So let's say, we've got 100 or so advisors now, and then ultimately their end clients, and then engaging with the broader GP or the manager community as well. So you've got all of these component parts, and so the product life cycle is sort of extended relative to what you would do on a traditional fixed income fund or an equity fund. So. Lots of moving parts, which is why I try and stay within your reins. But it's also very open architecture. There's a lot of product design, which is why I like it. But it's a big role.
Hey, if you're enjoying this, please leave a review. It's really important to us. We're trying to build momentum around education, and better reviews will get more people coming and listening. Yeah, I mean, you described private markets pretty well there, right? Like you mentioned the structuring, consulting, it's the legal wrapper. So an investor, it has to be delivered to investor in a form they can buy the thing. Is it a unit trust? Is it a bond? Is it equity? What is it? Because if it's not investable, it's no use having it there on the shelf, right? And that is the other interesting about private markets. It's not off the shelf. You go and buy an equity, you just log in and buy it. You need someone to interpose themselves between the alternative asset and the investor, which sounds like it's a role that you take on at sort of LGT Crestone.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which makes sense. Yeah. And if I just the last question, just on the specific alts, like what do you see in it for the, say, LGT Crestone client base, providing that alternative access from kind of a portfolio basis? Is this sort of could you summarize the key benefits in a couple of punchy lines?
Yeah, look, a lot of it comes back to diversification.
Yeah.
Right? It's simple. Keep it simple, right? And so, you've got your equities, bonds, and your cash portfolio. There's been a lot of debate around the 60-40 portfolio.
Yep.
Private equity and real assets, the wealth of opportunity from an investment perspective in the private markets is far greater than the public markets.
Yep.
So take equity, just over 10% of the public or companies in the US are public.
Yep.
The rest are private, yet we spend all of our time talking about 7 stocks at the moment, right?
Funny.
And so the diversification opportunity, just to start with, why are we ignoring? We're sort of fishing in a pond as opposed to the ocean, right?
Yep.
So that's the first point. Broadly speaking, and this is certainly more prevalent in the private equity side, is the enhanced returns that have been historically strong and persistent over that time. And then on the correlation part, private equity is still equity, private debt still debt, and we often forget that because of sort of differences in valuation methodology. But if you look at hedge funds, and not talking kind of long short equity hedge funds, which is arguably more beta, and other diversifiers, there is an absolute role that they play. So if you can generate strong risk adjusted returns in an environment that's not, or in a manner that's not just more equity or credit beta or interest rate beta, take a look at 2022, perfect scenario. If you can generate returns differently in a portfolio, it really improves the portfolio efficiency. So when you consider the suite of things that we have, I sort of named them before. Private equity, debt, venture, real estate, infrastructure, hedge funds, other diversifiers, crypto, who knows? Yep. You've got a whole suite of things that can add to the portfolio from a return, risk, and correlation perspective.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I'd argue that one of the absolute key things you're providing is simply access, right? Because these asset classes are often hard to find, hard to structure, hard to understand, and providing a sort of a vetted access is something quite unique in the Australian wealth market. It hasn't been investors haven't been able to access this asset class until very, very recently.
It's a new phenomenon.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's the access, but then it's the delivery mechanism as well, right? It's the access is great, and that's expanded as well, but then delivering it in a way that a private client actually allocates relative to the way that an institutional, and that's the bit that's really been missing.
Totally.
And so that's come such a long way in the last 5 and 6 years in particular.
Yep. Now jumping to sort of the just personal, habits and things like that. Top tips. If you're speaking to someone younger, you've got a new grad at work, what are a couple of tips you'd give them to sort of be successful at LGT Crestone or in their career in general?
Build the network, focus on relationships first and foremost. And again, don't get too obviously focus on the investment area, but just be yourself in that, because the relationship piece has really come back and benefited me.
Yeah, for sure.
Right. I mean, Scott wouldn't have offered me a job if he didn't know me and we hadn't built that relationship. Right. So that piece gets missed. It's funny, don't be afraid to dig in to the detail and understand why things work, how things work. I think, a lot of people operate at a surface level and they don't dig and understand the nuances behind the scenes, and that kind of loses out. There's not many people that will go the step further, use their initiative to understand the component parts. And certainly in a product development role, that's come in incredibly useful for me.
Yep, I agree.
Because, I feel there's a lot of people, certainly in our industry, that can focus on, I'm great at picking stocks, or I understand macro or markets, linking that to the underlying, how do things work from end to end. And so don't, miss out on that stuff because it's important certainly in this role.
Yep.
And then, keep the boundaries up. Make sure you don't take on board too much. Focus on what you know and what you don't know, and go straight down the fairway if you can.
Gotcha. Now getting some philosophical type space. What legacy do you think you're living and leaving?
I'll look from a personal perspective. The only thing I care about from a legacy perspective is the family, right? And so, I've been privileged to come into my stepson's life when he was 5, and so I can't take credit for the job that my wife and his dad have done. But if my my son and newborn I have on the way are anything like him, then that will be an amazing legacy.
Brilliant.
From a business perspective, this whole translation exercise, enabling access in the broader alternatives complex in a way that makes sense, that has been designed for our clientele is there. Yes, in the grand scheme of things, I'm not saving lives, right?
Yeah.
I would love to do more in the sort of the impacts and sustainability space and actively trying to do that. And I think that'll be more of a legacy that will warm me, warm my heart a little bit more. But, if the legacy is that I've come in with a non-pure investment focus and then delivered things that can meaningfully drive better outcomes for investors, because I've focused on the investors and the delivery mechanism and the build rather than just the intellectual investment stuff, that'll be a good place to be.
I like that. I like the approach, delivering the solutions. Okay, we've got a few quick fire questions. But one first. You've got obviously the kids. What about the sport? What do you bring to us from the UK?
I played a bit of footy, so
Gotcha.
Soccer.
Yep.
Got to get the terminology right here. I was a bit of a gym junkie back then, but I don't find I have enough time. And I used to swim as a kid, but
Gotcha.
I've got size 7 feet and tiny hands, so I was never going to make it, right?
Gotcha.
So, but yeah, I need to do a bit more on that. But unfortunately, I've never taken up the cricket and the ruggers and everything else, right?
That's all right. Okay, what was your first job? You can go as young as you want to go.
I was an IT technician at my high school.
Sounds pretty
so I'd
pretty
go,
advanced for a kid.
I say technician loosely. I'd go on and turn the computers on in the morning.
That's right. We
I'd
normally
replace a few screens.
Most of the time I hear people fruit picking or paper rounds.
Yeah,
you were straight into being a tech.
It was £7 an hour, I think, and I was doing like 5 or 6 hours a week. So, back in the day.
Now, a piece of advice for your younger self.
Just be yourself. Focus on what you know. And
perfect.
Yeah.
What motivates you most as a person?
Helping people.
Perfect. What are your tips for long-term wealth, growing long-term wealth?
Keep it simple.
It could be the opposite to this, but what's the biggest mistake people make?
Focusing on the deal, as opposed to being pragmatic. Focusing on what they don't know and forgetting that they don't know everything.
Gotcha. You've answered this next one a little bit as well. When you're not working, how do you spend your time?
Yeah, all family. Spend as much time as I can with the family.
Yeah, perfect.
And I live in a lovely part of the world, so I'm out and about walking the beaches as much as I can.
Brilliant. Thanks for making time today. Now, if anyone's interested in connecting with Martin, you can connect with him on LinkedIn. We'll include the link in the show notes, but really appreciate you coming in and having a chat.
Absolute
Been
pleasure,
great.
Travis.
Thank you.
Take care.
Hey, if you're enjoying this, please leave a review. It's really important to us. We're trying to build momentum around education, and better reviews will get more people coming and listening.